The unexpected assignment. James Marshall was not having a great day. As a senior engineer in the United Earth Alliance, he had seen his fair share of odd missions, but this one took the cake. He stood in the docking bay, clutching his bag and staring at the sleek, silver curves of the alien Starship before him. Its design was entirely unlike anything human engineers would create, smooth, organic, and almost alive. The mission briefing had been vague. His task was to assist an alien biologist, Carl of the Zelphi species, on a journey to study an uncharted region of space. The Alliance wanted to strengthen ties with the Zelphi, a race known for their advanced technology and peculiar customs. James thought he was prepared for anything, until the docking hatch opened. Carl was waiting for him, tall and serene, with shimmering blue skin and luminous yellow eyes. They were Zelphi through and through, graceful and otherworldly. But James was immediately distracted by the glaring absence of something he considered fundamental: clothing. Carl wore nothing but a small utility belt, seemingly unbothered by their appearance. "Ah, Engineer Marshall," Carl greeted, their voice smooth and melodic. "Welcome aboard the Seeker's Whisper. I trust your journey was comfortable." James tried not to stare, keeping his gaze firmly onto Carl's face. Yes. Thank you. It's an honor to be here." Carl tilted their head, their version of a smile. "You seem tense. Is the gravity setting too low?" James forced a chuckle. No, it's just different. I'll adjust." He followed Carl into the ship, doing his best to focus on his surroundings. The interior of the Seeker's Whisper was as alien as its exterior. Soft, glowing panels lined the walls, and the air had a faint floral scent. There were no chairs, only cushioned platforms that floated a few inches off the floor. The ship felt alive, like it was watching him. "I should mention," Carl said as they led him to his quarters, "our species does not share your culture's attachment to garments. Clothing is seen as inefficient for maintaining body temperature and health." James nodded stiffly. "Right. Got it." Carl paused, studying him curiously. "If this is uncomfortable for you, I can provide an adjustment period. Though I must admit, I find your species' attire equally peculiar." James managed a weak smile. "I'll manage. Just a bit of culture shock." His quarters were small but comfortable, with the same glowing walls and floating platform for a bed. He placed his bag down, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He was here for a job, and he wouldn't let a cultural difference get in the way. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be a very long mission. The next morning, James met Carl in the central control room. The Zelphi had already begun preparing for their journey, their fingers gliding over a translucent console that projected holographic star maps into the air. "Our destination is in Sector 47R. Carl explained, pointing to a glowing point on the map. "It's an uncharted region, rich with anomalies. The data suggests it may contain remnants of an ancient civilization." James perked up at the mention of ancient civilizations. He had always been fascinated by the mysteries of the galaxy. "What kind of anomalies are we talking about?" Carl's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Unstable energy fields, unexplained gravitational shifts, and symbols that resemble no known language. It's a puzzle, Engineer Marshall, and I trust you enjoy solving puzzles." James grinned despite himself. "I do. And please, call me James." "Very well, James." Carl gestured to a nearby panel. "You'll find the ship's systems here. They are somewhat organic in nature, so they may take some getting used to. I'm confident in your adaptability." James approached the console, noting how it pulsed faintly, as if alive. "Organic, huh? That's a first for me." "Think of it as a symbiotic relationship," Carl said. "The ship provides us with its capabilities, and in return, we maintain its health." James nodded, his engineer's mind already racing with questions. He placed his hands on the console, feeling a slight warmth beneath his fingers. The controls responded instantly, shifting and reshaping themselves to suit his touch. It was unnerving but fascinating. As the ship prepared for departure, James and T. Carl ran through final checks. The engines hummed softly, and the star maps flickered with data. Everything seemed routine, until the ship's lights dimmed for a brief moment. "What was that?" James asked, frowning. T. Carl's expression darkened. "Unusual. The Seeker's Whisper rarely experiences technical issues. I will run a diagnostic." James felt a chill run down his spine. It was probably nothing, just a glitch. But as the ship began to move, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was going to be far more complicated than he had anticipated. The first leg of their journey passed quietly, giving James time to adjust to the ship's quirks. He and T. Carl found a rhythm, working together to study the data coming from Sector 47R. Despite their differences, James found himself growing intrigued by his companion's insights and dedication. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't forget the flicker in the ship's systems, or the strange way the Starship seemed to hum with an awareness of its own. Something about this mission felt off, and James had a sinking feeling that they were about to find out why. The mystery begins. The Seeker's Whisper glided through the inky void of space, its smooth, organic hull absorbing starlight like a living creature. James sat at the control console, his fingers tapping idly as streams of data scrolled across the holographic display. T. Carl was on the other side of the room, analyzing a series of peculiar energy readings. The alien's yellow eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, their focus absolute. "What do you make of this?" James asked, breaking the silence. He pointed to a pulsating signal on the display, a strange, rhythmic pattern that seemed almost like music. T. Carl turned their head slightly, their expression unreadable. "It's a harmonic signature, unlike anything I've encountered. It's as if the planet itself is emitting it." "That's not creepy at all," James muttered, leaning back in his seat. He had a habit of masking unease with humor, but even he couldn't ignore the eerie quality of the signal. It seemed alive, like a voice calling out through the vastness of space. "We are nearing the planet," T. Carl said, straightening. "Prepare for orbital insertion." James snapped to attention, his hands flying over the console. The ship responded instantly, adjusting its trajectory with a fluid grace that still amazed him. As they approached, the planet came into view, a swirling sphere of greens and blues, with veins of glowing gold running across its surface. It was breathtaking, but there was something unsettling about its perfect symmetry. "That's unusual," James said, frowning. "Planets don't usually look like this." "It is indeed unique," T. Carl replied, their voice calm but tinged with excitement. "The energy readings are strongest near those golden veins. We'll focus our scans there." As the ship slipped into orbit, the harmonic signature grew louder, resonating through the ship's hull. James felt it in his chest, a deep vibration that made his skin prickle. "Tell me that's not normal." "It is not," T. Carl said, their brow furrowed. "But it does suggest intelligent design." "Great, intelligent and mysterious," James said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing bad ever happens with that combo." The ship's systems began to behave strangely as they initiated their scans. The display flickered, showing distorted images of the planet's surface. Symbols James didn't recognize appeared and vanished in rapid succession. "This can't be a glitch," James said, his voice low. "It's like something's interfering with the system." "Not interfering," T. Carl corrected. "Communicating. The ship's sensors are interpreting the energy fields, but the language is unfamiliar." James leaned closer to the console, his heart racing. "You're saying the planet is trying to talk to us?" "In a manner of speaking," T. Carl said. "This is no ordinary world. It is a construct, a creation of advanced intelligence." James swallowed hard, his mind racing. "A construct, like a giant machine." "Possibly," T. Carl said, their voice calm despite the implications, "or perhaps a living entity. Either way, It is ancient and powerful. The thought sent a chill down James's spine. He had signed up for exploration, not first contact with an incomprehensible alien intelligence. But before he could voice his concerns, an alarm blared through the ship. Gravitational anomaly detected, the ship's AI announced in a soft, neutral tone. James gripped the console as the ship lurched, pulled toward the planet by an unseen force. What the hell is happening? The planet's gravity is fluctuating, T. Carl said, their voice steady despite the chaos. It's drawing us in. James's hands flew over the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. We need to pull back. No, T. Carl said firmly. This is an opportunity. We must investigate. You can investigate after we're not crashing. James snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. The ship shuddered violently, but then, as suddenly as it began, the pull stopped. The alarms went silent, and the Seeker's whisper drifted gently in orbit once more. James exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. That was fun. Let's never do it again. Carl ignored his sarcasm, their eyes fixed on the display. The anomaly originated from a specific location on the surface, the structure. James followed their gaze, his stomach sinking. The holographic display showed an image of a massive, hexagonal structure embedded in the planet's surface. It glowed faintly, the golden veins converging at its center. Let me guess, James said. You want to go there? Of course, T. Carl replied, as if the answer was obvious. This is what we came for. Reluctantly, James helped prepare the landing shuttle. His engineering instincts told him this was a terrible idea, but his curiosity wouldn't let him back down. As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, the harmonic signature grew louder, almost deafening. It felt less like sound and more like emotion, waves of urgency and anticipation. The shuttle touched down near the hexagonal structure, its surface smooth and glistening as if freshly polished. The golden veins pulsed rhythmically, casting an eerie glow across the landscape. Beautiful, T. Carl murmured, stepping out of the shuttle. Their bare feet touched the ground with a reverence that made James feel like they were intruding on sacred ground. Yeah, beautiful, James muttered, scanning the area nervously. And definitely not a trap. Carl approached the structure, their hands outstretched as if greeting an old friend. The golden veins brightened at their touch, and a deep hum resonated through the air. What's happening? James asked, gripping his scanner tightly. The structure is responding, T. Carl said, their voice tinged with awe. It recognizes us. Recognizes us? James echoed, his pulse quickening. What does that even mean? Before T. Carl could answer, the ground beneath them began to shift. A circular doorway appeared in the side of the structure, opening with a low, resonant tone. James stared at the dark entrance, his instincts screaming at him to run. But T. Carl stepped forward, their expression calm and determined. Shall we? They asked, glancing back at James. James sighed, gripping his scanner like a lifeline. I've got a bad feeling about this. And with that, they stepped into the unknown. The forbidden landing. The circular doorway yawned open before them, its edges glowing faintly with the same golden light that coursed through the veins of the structure. Beyond it lay only darkness, deep and impenetrable, as if the light outside dared not venture within. James hesitated at the threshold, his instincts screaming at him to stop. This felt wrong, like stepping into the mouth of a predator. Carl, however, showed no such hesitation. The Zelphi biologist strode forward with the same calm confidence they always carried, their glowing yellow eyes scanning the shadows with curiosity rather than fear. Wait, James said, his voice tight. We don't know what's in there. Carl paused, turning back to him with their usual serene expression. Precisely, James. That is why we must explore. Knowledge requires risk. Yeah, well, knowledge doesn't usually involve walking into creepy alien caves, James muttered, gripping his portable scanner tightly. But despite his protests, he followed. After all, This was his job, to assist, to observe, and, when necessary, to fix whatever broke. And something about this place felt like it was waiting to break. As they stepped inside, the darkness receded, replaced by a soft, ambient glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The interior of the structure was vast, with arched ceilings and intricate patterns etched into every surface. The golden veins pulsed faintly, casting shifting shadows that played tricks on James's eyes. "This is incredible," T. Carl murmured, their voice echoing softly. "These markings, they're not decorative. They're functional." James squinted at the walls. The patterns did resemble some kind of circuitry, but they were far too complex for him to decipher. Functional how? Carl reached out, their slender fingers tracing one of the glowing lines. Energy transfer, perhaps, or data storage. This entire structure may be a living system. Living, James repeated, his tone skeptical. Like the ship. More advanced, T. Carl replied. This is ancient, but it surpasses even our understanding. James shuddered. The idea of a living structure, one that could think or feel, was unsettling enough. But an ancient, advanced one, that was the stuff of nightmares. They ventured deeper, the air growing heavier with every step. The harmonic vibration they'd felt outside was stronger here, resonating in their bones. James couldn't shake the feeling that the structure was watching them, its unseen eyes tracking their every move. After several minutes, they reached what appeared to be the central chamber. The room was circular, with a raised platform in the middle surrounded by the same glowing veins. Suspended above the platform was a sphere of light, its surface swirling with colors and symbols that shifted too quickly for James to process. "This is the source," T. Carl said, their voice barely above a whisper. "The energy field originates here." James scanned the sphere, his device struggling to keep up with the fluctuating readings. "This thing is putting out more power than any reactor I've ever seen. How is it even stable?" "It may not be," T. Carl said, their tone thoughtful. "This level of energy suggests a purpose far beyond what we can comprehend. We must proceed carefully." "Carefully," James said, gesturing around them. "We're standing in the middle of a ticking time bomb, and you want to poke it." Before T. Carl could respond, the sphere pulsed, emitting a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the room. The walls responded, their patterns shifting and realigning as if the structure itself was waking up. To Carl," James said, his voice rising. "I think we've overstayed our welcome." To Carl didn't move. Their gaze was fixed on the sphere, their expression one of awe. "It's not a time bomb," they said softly. "It's a beacon." The moment the words left Carl's mouth, the sphere emitted another pulse, this one brighter and more forceful. James staggered back, shielding his eyes as the light filled the chamber. When it dimmed, the symbols on the walls had changed. They no longer resembled random patterns. They were words, or at least they were something like words. The symbols shifted and rearranged themselves, forming sentences in a language James couldn't recognize. Carl, however, seemed to understand. "It's a record," they said, their voice trembling. "A history. A history of what?" James asked, glancing warily at the glowing walls. Carl didn't answer immediately. Their eyes scanned the symbols, their expression growing more intense with every passing second. "Of us," they said finally. "Humans and Zelfi." James froze. "What do you mean, of us?" "These records," T. Carl said, gesturing to the walls. "They speak of an ancient alliance, a union of species working together to build wonders beyond imagination. Humans and Zelfi were once allies." "That's impossible," James said, his heart pounding. "Humans didn't even leave Earth until a few centuries ago." "The evidence is here," T. Carl said, their voice firm. "This structure, this technology, it predates both our civilizations. We've forgotten our past, but this place remembers." Before James could respond, the sphere pulsed again, this time sending a shockwave through the chamber. The walls flickered, and a harmonic vibration grew louder, almost deafening. "We need to go," James said, grabbing to Carl's arm. "This place is unstable." Carl hesitated, their gaze lingering on the sphere. "But the answers won't matter if we're dead," James snapped, pulling them toward the exit. As they sprinted back through the corridors, the structure seemed to come alive around them. The glowing veins pulsed erratically, and the walls shifted as if trying to close in. James's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. When they finally burst out into the open air, the doorway sealed behind them with a final, thunderous boom. The golden veins dimmed, leaving the structure silent once more. James doubled over, hands on his knees, as he tried to catch his breath. "Next time," he panted, "we're bringing a bigger team. And maybe some explosives." Carl straightened, their gaze fixed on the now dormant structure. "We've only just begun," they said quietly. "The past is not as distant as we thought." James looked at them, his unease growing. Something told him this was only the beginning of their troubles. Secrets in the shadows. The silence outside the structure was unsettling, broken only by the faint hum of the planet's energy veins. James stood near the shuttle, glaring at the now sealed doorway. His pulse was finally steady, but his nerves weren't. Something about this place didn't sit right with him, and Carl's calm demeanor wasn't helping. "We just nearly got crushed by a living building," James said, his voice sharp. "Why do you look like that was a normal Tuesday?" Carl didn't reply immediately. They were staring at their portable holographic recorder, which displayed a swirling mess of symbols. "Because, James, what we witnessed is beyond extraordinary. This structure, this archive, holds the key to our shared history, perhaps even our future." "Right," James muttered. "Because mysterious alien technology that almost kills us is always about hope and progress. Cynicism will not serve us," Carl said, their tone gently chiding. "We must understand what happened inside." The pair decided to examine the data in the relative safety of the shuttle. Inside, James ran a diagnostic on his equipment, grateful for the familiar hum of machinery. Carl sat cross-legged in front of their recorder, their luminous eyes scanning the holograms as symbols rearranged themselves in intricate patterns. "Anything useful in that mess?" James asked. Carl nodded slowly. "The archive is fragmented, but the pieces I've decoded speak of a cataclysm, a force that destroyed the alliance between humans and Zelfi." James frowned. "A force? Like an enemy?" "Perhaps," Carl said, their voice thoughtful. "But it is described as inevitable, a natural consequence of something we unleashed together." James leaned back in his chair, the unease he'd felt since they landed coiling tighter in his chest. "So you're telling me humans and Zelfi worked together, built this super-advanced civilization, and then, what? Blew it all up?" Carl tilted their head, considering. "The archive does not use the word destruction. It speaks of fragmentation, as if our alliance fractured." "That's not exactly comforting," James muttered. "If it happened before, it could happen again." "Not if we learn from our past mistakes," Carl said firmly. "This discovery is a chance for both our species to rebuild what was lost." James wasn't convinced, but before he could argue further, the shuttle's alarm system blared. "Proximity alert," the ship's AI announced in its calm, monotone voice. James spun to the controls. "What now?" The external cameras showed movement near the structure. Small, glowing shapes darted around the golden veins like fireflies, their motions erratic and fast. "What are those?" James asked, narrowing his eyes at the screen. Carl leaned closer, their expression unreadable. "Energy constructs," they said after a moment. "Sentinels, perhaps." "Sentinels," James repeated. "As in guards?" "Possibly," Carl said, their tone measured. "Or they may simply be remnants of the structure's systems, maintaining its integrity." "Well, they're heading right for us," James said, pointing to the screen. The constructs were converging on the shuttle, their light growing brighter. Carl stood and moved to the airlock. "We must not appear hostile." "Hostile," James sputtered, following them. "They're the ones charging at us." Carl ignored him, opening the airlock and stepping outside. James hesitated, then grabbed his scanner and followed, muttering curses under his breath. The constructs were even more unsettling up close. They were amorphous blobs of light, shifting constantly as if made of liquid energy. They hovered a few feet off the ground, circling James and Carl in a slow, deliberate pattern. "What are they doing?" James whispered, clutching his scanner like a weapon. Carl raised a hand, their posture calm and open. "They are observing us." "Observing," James repeated. "Great. Let's hope they don't decide to vaporize us." One of the constructs drifted closer to Carl, its glow intensifying. For a moment, James thought it might attack, but instead, it emitted a soft, melodic tone. The sound was eerily similar to the harmonic vibrations they'd felt earlier. "It's communicating," Carl said, their voice hushed, responding to the archive. James's scanner beeped, drawing his attention. The constructs were emitting data, streams of symbols identical to the ones inside the structure. "What does it mean?" James asked, staring at the symbols. "It's a continuation," Carl said, their eyes wide with realization. "The archive's message wasn't complete. These constructs are its messengers." Before James could process that, the construct near Carl shifted. A beam of light shot out from its center, forming a three-dimensional hologram in the air. The image was blurry at first, but it soon resolved into a scene. A grand meeting hall filled with humans and Zelfi standing side by side. The hologram shifted, showing a massive structure rising into the sky, its design a blend of human and Zelfi architecture. Then it changed again, showing the same structure engulfed in flames, its golden veins burning like molten lava. The final image was the most haunting. Two figures, one human, one Zelfi, standing on opposite sides of a shattered bridge, their faces filled with sorrow. The hologram faded, and the constructs retreated, their light dimming as they disappeared into the distance. James stared at the empty space where the hologram had been, his heart heavy. "That's not a great omen." Carl turned to him, their expression grim. "It is a warning. The past must not repeat itself." "Yeah, well, we're off to a great start," James said, his voice bitter. "We can't even figure out what tore us apart, let alone how to fix it." "We will," Carl said, their tone resolute. "This journey is only beginning." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure whether to be inspired by Carl's optimism or terrified by what lay ahead. One thing was certain: this mission was far more dangerous and far more important than he'd ever imagined. The truth unveiled. The shuttle hummed softly as it soared through the atmosphere, leaving the mysterious structure behind. James sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the endless expanse of golden-veined terrain below. His mind was racing, the holographic images from the constructs playing on an endless loop in his head. A bridge shattered, a union destroyed. He couldn't shake the look of sorrow on the faces of the human and Zelfi figures. They hadn't just been allies, they had been partners, tied together by something greater than survival or politics. And then they'd lost it all. Carl sat beside him, their glowing eyes focused on the data streaming from their portable holographic recorder. Despite their calm demeanor, James could sense the tension radiating from them. "You're awfully quiet," James said, breaking the silence. Carl didn't look up. "There is much to process." "Yeah, no kidding," James muttered. "We just found out that humans and Zelfi were space besties who managed to screw it all up. I'd say that's a lot to process." Carl finally turned to him, their expression serious. "It is more than that, James. The constructs revealed fragments, but the true answers lie deeper. We must return to the archive." James stared at them, incredulous. Return, after it nearly crushed us and sent its glowing pets to observe us. Are you serious? The archive did not attack us, Carl said, their tone calm but firm. It tested us, and we passed. Passed what, exactly? James shot back. A quiz on how long we can survive in a collapsing death trap. Carl ignored his sarcasm, gesturing to the recorder. The constructs shared knowledge with us. They revealed a timeline, a sequence of events leading to the Alliance's collapse. But the final piece is still missing. James groaned, running a hand through his hair. Fine. Let's say we go back. How do we even know where to start? That place doesn't exactly come with a user manual. Carl's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. The constructs gave us coordinates. The coordinates led them to another site, miles from the original structure. This one was buried beneath the surface, visible only as a faint golden glow seeping through cracks in the ground. It looked less like a building and more like a scar, a wound in the planet itself. This is it? James asked, squinting at the glowing fissures. Doesn't exactly scream ancient superstructure. It is beneath, Carl said. Help me find the entrance. James grumbled but followed their lead, scanning the area with his handheld device. The ground beneath them was unstable, the energy readings spiking erratically. It felt like walking on the surface of a dormant volcano, with the constant threat of eruption lurking beneath their feet. Finally, Carl found a narrow passage leading underground. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and James had to fight back a surge of claustrophobia as they descended into the darkness. The passage opened into a cavern, its walls lined with the same glowing veins they'd seen before. But unlike the first structure, this place was in ruins. Sections of the walls were cracked and crumbling, and the golden veins pulsed weakly, as if the structure itself were dying. This doesn't look promising, James said, his voice echoing in the vast space. Carl knelt by one of the walls, running their fingers over the fractured surface. It is damage, yes, but the core systems may still function. James sighed, pulling out his tools. Let me guess, you want me to fix it. Your skills are unmatched, Carl said, their tone almost teasing. I am confident you can succeed. James muttered something under his breath, but got to work. The machinery embedded in the walls was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a mix of organic and synthetic components that defied logic. But as he worked, a strange sense of familiarity began to creep in. It's almost intuitive, James said, frowning as he connected two glowing conduits, like it's designed to be used by humans. Carl finished, watching him closely. And selfie, together. James paused, the weight of their words sinking in. This wasn't just an ancient structure, it was a relic of their shared past, a past that had been deliberately hidden. After what felt like hours, the machinery hummed to life. The golden veins brightened, and the cavern was bathed in warm light. In the center of the room, a pedestal rose from the ground, holding a small crystalline object that pulsed with energy. Carl approached it cautiously, their expression reverent. This is it, the final piece. James frowned. What is it? Carl hesitated, their fingers hovering above the crystal. A memory, they said finally. The archive's final record. They touched the crystal, and the room was instantly filled with light. Holographic images flickered to life around them, showing scenes from the Alliance's peak, humans and Selfie working side by side, their achievements unparalleled. Then came the fall. The holograms shifted to scenes of conflict, arguments, betrayal, and the slow unraveling of their partnership. The cause wasn't war or invasion. It was fear. Fear of dependence. Fear of losing identity. It wasn't an external enemy, James said, his voice quiet. We tore ourselves apart. Carl nodded, their expression somber. The Alliance was a reflection of our shared potential, but our differences became our undoing. The final image was a single phrase, written in both human and selfie script. Unity through understanding. As the holograms faded, the crystal dimmed, its energy spent. James and T. Carl stood in silence, the weight of the truth settling over them. "So, what now?" James asked finally. "We've got a shiny crystal and a history lesson. How does that help us fix anything?" "It is a beginning," T. Carl said, their voice steady. "The past is no longer hidden. With this knowledge, we can build a future that honors what was lost." James wasn't sure if he believed them, but as they ascended back to the surface, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. And for the first time since they'd arrived, he felt a glimmer of hope. The ancient guardian. The shuttle thrummed with subdued energy as it rose from the surface, its cargo bay now housing the crystalline artifact. James sat at the console, staring at the inert object through the reinforced glass. It didn't look like much. A simple shard of glowing crystal no larger than his hand. But it carried the weight of two civilizations, their shared triumphs and failures encoded within. Carl stood beside him, their posture rigid with tension. The Zelfi biologist, usually so composed, now exuded a barely contained urgency. Their glowing eyes were fixed on the artifact, as if willing it to reveal more secrets. "You're awfully quiet," James said, breaking the silence. Carl didn't turn. "The artifact is incomplete." James blinked. "Incomplete? What do you mean?" "We risked our necks for that thing." "It is a fragment," T. Carl said, their voice heavy. The archive's message was fractured. "This piece holds critical information, but it does not hold everything." James frowned, leaning back in his seat. "So, what?" "We go digging for more pieces." Carl finally turned to him, their expression grim. "We may not need to." James raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like good news." "It depends," T. Carl said, their tone carefully measured, "on how you feel about meeting the Guardian." The term Guardian had an ominous ring to it, and James wasn't thrilled about the idea. But T. Carl explained that the archive's creators had built an artificial intelligence, a central overseer designed to protect their knowledge. If the archive had been fragmented, the Guardian might still hold the original, complete message. Of course, there was a catch. The Guardian wasn't just a passive repository of information. It was also a gatekeeper, programmed to assess any who sought its knowledge. And if it deemed them unworthy, well, T. Carl had said, its definition of unworthy may vary. "Fantastic," James muttered as the shuttle approached the coordinates for the Guardian's core. "So we're flying into the judgment zone of some ancient super AI that might decide to vaporize us, because we don't measure up." Carl's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "You underestimate your species, James." "I think I'm underestimating our chances of surviving this." James shot back. The core was located deep within the planet's surface, accessible only through a narrow canyon that seemed to stretch endlessly into the golden veined terrain. The shuttle descended carefully, its lights illuminating the jagged rock walls. At the canyon's base, a massive circular door loomed, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. "This is it," T. Carl said, their voice hushed. James studied the door, his unease growing. "How do we get in?" "We ask," T. Carl said simply. They stepped forward, raising the crystalline artifact. The moment it caught the light, the patterns on the door shifted, rearranging themselves into a recognizable language. "Who seeks the Guardian?" The voice was deep and resonant, vibrating through the air like the toll of a distant bell. James flinched, glancing at T. Carl. Do we answer that?" "We must," T. Carl said, their tone steady. "It will not open otherwise." James sighed, stepping forward. "We're explorers, humans and Zelfi. We've come to understand our past." There was a long pause, and then the door responded. "Exploration implies curiosity. Curiosity implies understanding. Do you possess the will to seek truth, even at great cost?" James exchanged a glance with Carl. That's a loaded question. It is a test, Carl said quietly. We must answer honestly. Yeah, but if we say no, does it just shut us out forever? Unlikely, Carl replied. It would simply destroy us. Comforting, James muttered. He turned back to the door. Yes, we're ready. The door split down the middle, opening with a low, grinding sound. Beyond it was a massive chamber, its walls lined with glowing panels that shifted and moved like waves of liquid light. At the center of the room stood a towering construct, a humanoid figure made of crystalline material, its form both graceful and imposing. Its eyes, two glowing orbs, fixed on them as they entered. You've got to be kidding me, James whispered. It's a giant glowing robot. The guardian spoke, its voice echoing through the chamber. You have come seeking answers. But answers are earned, not given. You will be tested. James groaned. Of course we will. Why would it be easy? Carl stepped forward, their expression calm. We are prepared. The guardian's eyes glowed brighter. Your species once stood united. Together, you achieved greatness. But fear divided you. Betrayal severed your bond. Tell me, why should you be trusted to rebuild what was lost? James blinked, caught off guard. Wait, we're being judged for something that happened thousands of years ago. The sins of the past echo into the present, the guardian said. Trust must be earned anew. Prove your unity. The chamber transformed. Holographic projections surrounded them, showing scenes from the ancient alliance, moments of triumph and tragedy. Then the images shifted, showing James and Carl themselves, their journey to this moment playing out in rapid succession. Is it spying on us? James asked. It is assessing, Carl said. The Guardian is determining whether we embody the values of the Alliance. Before James could respond, the floor beneath them lit up, forming a complex series of patterns. The Guardian extended one crystalline arm, pointing at the shapes. Solve the sequence, it said. Together. James stared at the glowing patterns. They resembled a puzzle, with symbols that needed to be arranged in a specific order. You've got to be kidding me. It is a test of cooperation, Carl said. We must work as one. Great, James muttered. No pressure. The puzzle was maddeningly complex, requiring both logic and intuition. Carl deciphered the symbols, their mind attuned to patterns James couldn't see, while James manipulated the controls, his hands moving with practiced precision. They argued, stumbled, and corrected each other, but slowly the pieces began to fall into place. When the final symbol clicked into position, the chamber filled with light. The Guardian's voice resonated once more. You have proven your unity. The past may be remembered, but the future is yours to shape. The crystalline construct stepped aside, revealing a pedestal with a second artifact, a perfect match to the first. Carl approached it reverently. This is it, the Archive's full record. James exhaled, his shoulders slumping. Let's hope it was worth it. As they left the chamber, the Guardian's final words followed them. Do not squander what you have reclaimed. James glanced at Carl. For the first time, he felt the weight of the Guardian's warning. The burden of history was heavy, but perhaps together they could carry it. The final revelation. The Seeker's whisper sailed through the void, its sleek form reflecting the soft light of distant stars. Inside, James sat in the central control room, staring at the two crystalline artifacts resting side by side on the console. Together, they emitted a faint glow, their pulsing rhythms perfectly synchronized, like two hearts beating as one. Carl was silent, their luminous eyes fixed on the artifacts. The Zelfi biologist, usually so composed, now radiated a quiet intensity. They had spent hours analyzing the information encoded within the crystals, and now it was time to share the truth. Well, James asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. What did we risk our lives for this time? Carl turned to him, their expression unreadable. The archive's full message has been restored. It is both extraordinary and troubling. James raised an eyebrow. That's not ominous at all. Spill it. Carl gestured to the artifacts, and a series of holographic images sprang to life in the air around them. They depicted scenes of the ancient alliance, humans and Zelfi working together to build marvels of technology and art, their achievements unparalleled in scope and beauty. This is the beginning, T. Carl said softly. Our species were united by a shared vision, a desire to create something greater than ourselves. The images shifted, showing vast cities that blended human and Zelfi architecture, their golden spires reaching into the heavens. But then, the tone darkened. The once thriving alliance began to crumble, mistrust creeping into their ranks like a poison. The fractures began small, T. Carl continued. Disagreements over priorities, cultural differences, and fears of losing individual identity. These fears grew into resentment. James frowned, watching as the holograms showed heated debates turning into open conflict. So we tore ourselves apart over petty arguments. That's depressing. Not petty, T. Carl said, their tone firm. The alliance's vision demanded sacrifice, compromises that not everyone was willing to make. Fear of dependence turned to betrayal. The images shifted again, revealing the final days of the alliance. The grand cities were abandoned, their golden structures tarnished and crumbling. The humans and Zelfi, who had once worked side by side, now stood on opposite sides of a fractured world. What happened to the cities? James asked, his voice quiet. They were dismantled, T. Carl said. Each species took what they could, retreating to their own worlds. The archive calls it the Great Retreat. James leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. So, all of this whole mission, it's just a reminder of how good we were at screwing things up. No, T. Carl said sharply. It is a reminder of what we are capable of when we stand together. The alliance fell, yes, but its legacy remains. James snorted. Legacy? What legacy? We didn't even know this place existed until now. Carl stepped closer, their eyes blazing with intensity. And now you do. Knowledge is a legacy, James. It is a bridge between what was and what could be. As the holograms faded, the crystals pulsed brighter, their light casting shifting patterns on the walls. James stared at them, a question forming in his mind. What about the Guardian? He asked. Why didn't it stop the alliance from falling apart? Carl hesitated, their expression thoughtful. The Guardian was not created to interfere. It was designed to preserve knowledge, to ensure the past would not be forgotten. Fat lot of good that did, James muttered. It did exactly what it was meant to do, T. Carl said. The Guardian knew the alliance would fail, but it also knew that failure is not the end. It is a lesson. James sighed, rubbing his temples. You're saying all of this, all the sacrifices, the betrayals, was just some cosmic teaching moment. Not cosmic, T. Carl said. Personal. For us. For our species. The archive was left behind so we could learn from the past and do better. As the Seeker's whisper approached their home system, James found himself staring out at the stars. He had always thought of space as vast and empty, a cold expanse filled with distant lights. But now it felt different. It felt alive, filled with the echoes of a history he had never known. So, what do we do now? James asked, his voice subdued. Carl joined him at the viewport, their gaze fixed on the shimmering stars. We take the archive back to our people. We share its truth, and we build a new alliance. James laughed bitterly. You make it sound so easy. Do you really think humans and Zelfi are ready for this? Perhaps not, T. Carl admitted, but readiness is not a requirement. Courage is. James glanced at them, surprised by the conviction in their voice. For all their differences, he had come to respect Carl's unwavering determination. Maybe they were right. Maybe courage was enough. As they prepared to land, the crystalline artifacts pulsed one last time, their light brighter than ever. James felt a strange sense of hope, fragile but real. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And for the first time, he believed it could be something worth fighting for.